Good morning, and welcome back to the Share Series Monday Management Update. I have the pleasure of speaking with Peter Platzer, CEO of Spire Global. Before we jump in, I just want to remind the audience of the method to submit questions during the session. There's a video player on the top right. There's a button, submit those, and we'll get your inquiries live during the session. So with that being said, Peter, I'll turn it over to you. Spire Global is a fascinating organization, that I think a lot of people misunderstand. And so I think a really good place to start is what is Spire, what does Global do, and how did Spire come about?
How much time do you have?
Unfortunately, only 30.
No, I mean, I'm really excited to be here. But if you think about it, any logistics company that wants to know where their stuff is, any airport that wants to improve its operations, any renewable energy company that wants to improve their bottom line, any shipping company concerned about safety in the South China Sea, a Formula One race team that wants to look for an edge, or about another 150, 200,000 potential customers across at least 175 major use cases are potential customers of Spire. Basically, if adaptation, mitigation, or reduction of climate change impact or global security are important for your business, Spire may be your best bet. We are the space company focused on the future of planet Earth, leveraging space data and analytics to create a more sustainable, prosperous, and safer future for humanity. We've got over 100 satellites on orbit. It's a fully deployed constellation. We track all of Earth 24/7, covering every spot at least 100 times per day. 500,000 ships and planes, whether from New York to New Zealand to the North Pole and anywhere in between. Sea ice and wildfires, those are all data that Spire satellites track. And then we sell those as a subscription to almost 800 customers across the world from 8 offices, where our over 400 people work pretty much relentlessly 24/7 to deliver innovative solutions to our customers. We've got over 500 years of cumulative space heritage and sophisticated analytics and AI and machine learning capabilities that gives us a massive moat, delivering those services and capabilities into a massive TAM of just about 100 billion.
So what led to the actual founding? Was there a technology breakthrough that you guys had? Obviously, there was a need in the market for sure.
Yeah, you can say that the least, and I think we might talk about this in a little bit. But if you think back to like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Moore's law, the doubling of compute power every 2 years, drove the revolution from mainframe computers to personal computers and now mobile computers. And I have been dreaming about leveraging space to improve life on Earth for over 40 years. And I wrote my mission statement: to inspire, lead, and create the business of space for the benefit of all. That's my life's mission statement. Over 20 years ago, for the longest time, there wasn't such an underlying driving force. So about a decade ago, I did research for my last graduate degree in France. And there I discovered a similar law. Small satellite capabilities have been increasing tenfold every 5 years, about 50% faster than Moore's law for the last 25 years now. And there is no end in sight for that trend. And it really was a discovery of that, predictable, reliable trend in, now it's, 12 years ago, that led me and a couple others to start the company, because we predicted where capabilities will be for small satellites, a particular constellation of small satellites, and how you could leverage those to solve real-world use cases. And we had those firm business principles that were lying on top of that predictable exponential law, namely the data that we're going to collect, and we're clear that we're going to be a data business that collects data and sells it as a subscription. That data is only and exclusively available from space. So there is no competition with terrestrial means. So that was number one. Number two, it's going to be data which requires a whole constellation of satellites, so that launching a single satellite doesn't pose any competitive threat to us whatsoever. There's a couple of other businesses where you can launch a single satellite and provide a little bit of a business, not so for the stuff that we do. And then the third one, also very important component, is that our satellites, our technology is software defined, which means we can change what it does and how it does it, even after it has been deployed to space. And all of those three elements have further increased the competitive advantage that we have and allowed us to carve out a very large area of the market where we can be a very, very strong leading player, following that GE philosophy, be the number one in the market, be the number two in the market. Otherwise, you're going to have a very clear plan of how to be that.
Yeah. So let's get into a little bit about the competition, right? The satellites themselves. And so can you explain a little about who you're competing with, right? And obviously different areas. And then just for the audience, because a lot of them are generalists, you can explain a little bit about the different satellite categories where you play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have a slide for that. And there are three different types of satellites. Yeah, we call them talking, looking, and listening. Talking satellites are, sometimes they're called communication satellites that basically transport data from one spot on Earth via space to another spot on Earth. And you have companies like a Viasat and the AST and the Starlink and the Kuiper and a whole bunch of other companies that are in this type of business of just providing data transportation. You rent out that capacity. Then there are what we call looking satellites. Those are satellites that take the reflection of the sunlight as it comes up towards the sky and use that to generate their data. It works really well, during the day. Obviously, you need the sun, as well as doing good weather conditions. And it's generally most useful over the 25% or so of the Earth's land mass. And so companies that you have there is like a Maxar, a Planet, a Black Sky, a Satellogic, an Airbus. Those are all typical imaging companies. And then you have listening companies that use radio frequencies that capture data on Earth or around Earth. They obviously don't need the sun, and they work during all weather conditions. As a matter of fact, they actually give you information about the weather, like the wind speed in a hurricane, that helps you predict where the hurricane is going to go. And you have companies in there like a Hawkeye, a GeoOptics, Clears. Those are typical companies that you have in that listening category. Spire is a listening company. We use radio frequencies to observe what is happening on or around Earth. Our motto that you find, is like, we hear you, Earth, because that's kind of like what we do. And in that category, we are the largest company. We have the largest deployed constellation. As far as we know, the largest amount of revenue, largest amount of customers. So that is what we focus on. That is our category. And across those categories, there actually isn't any competition. There are some collaborations sometimes, so we have collaborated with some of the imaging companies to provide combined products, but there isn't actually any competition. There can, in certain instances, be a competition inside that listening category. So, for example, Spire competes with a Hawkeye, right? They provide listening capabilities to the United States government, and Spire provides listening capabilities to the government. But there is no company, at least none that we are aware of, that has a fully deployed constellation that is tracking all of the world's ships, all of the world's planes, all of the world weather, and providing analytics and predictions and solutions across those three segments to customers as a subscription across the world. That's a very unique value proposition from Spire, and a very complete offering and operational leverage. And as later maybe talk about some of the financials, giving us a very, very strong profile, because we get to amortize that infrastructure across multiple segments, something that none of the companies that we are aware of is able to do.
Oh, perfect. So moving ahead here, looking at demand. And so when you think about the total addressable market that you have, right? How big is it? Where are you today? Talk a little bit about what you see in repeat customers, right, and how you gain more share of wallet with those.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it's about 150, 200,000 potential customers across something like 175 major use cases at least, and they come from various big blocks of industries like maritime, aviation, weather, space services. And then inside those, you have like massive number of industry verticals, like anything from illegal fishing to maritime insurance to aftermarket service of aircraft, leasing, insurance, anything which is impacted by the weather, agriculture, and renewable energy, logistics, right? So there's just like a whole set of those use cases. And you can see by the rapid growth, I mean, we've been growing from 1 million to just about 100 million ARR in 5 years. And there's only a handful of companies that we are aware of that has been able to grow their recurring revenue business that quickly. How big the pent-up demand is. And I think it has a lot to do with 2 elements of our strategy. Number one, the data that we have cannot be supplied by terrestrial means. So it is truly something substantially that is only available from space. And we have found a way to create the technology and deploy the technology and then offer that solutions in a cost-effective way to meet that demand. And then the second one is that it is using radio frequencies, which is a different modality than often had been used in the past. So it just collects, again, a very different data set from some other modalities. So we are, of course, very, very pleased with this large open demand. Best guess for us, it's about $100 billion. And we are at the very, very early stages, a bit over 100 million at this point in time. And our growth potential is both in landing, as we call it, which is finding new customers, as well as in expanding, which is solving additional use cases for the customers that we have landed as we add additional value-added product. And we have like 110, 150, 116%, what's called net retention rate, which is basically how much more do customers buy from you year over year as they stay with you and consume your products.
Makes sense. So you talk a lot about the data, right? The service offerings for the customer itself. And so let's get into that a little bit and talk about the different data, the solutions that you have, and how that whole process works.
Yeah, so that's another pretty unique aspect of Spire, is like how the company has been set up from day one is to collect the data once and then sell it many, many, many times, which is like a classic data company, a classic SaaS company. And you will hear that theme over and over again, like we are, for all intents and purposes, a standard SaaS company, meaning we collect that data once all across the world, fully deployed constellation, and then we clean it, we organize it, we make it easy to consume, and that is our clean data product that allows customers to understand what is happening right now, or if they get access to our historical database, what has been happening in the past. Then we take that and we create analytics on top of it, as well as fusing in third-party data. So we make the data smart, which is exactly, not very ingenuity here. Our product, is called smart data, right? We made it a little bit smarter, so we call it smart data. And customers then can consume it again as a subscription. And then as the next layer is, of course, okay, that's great. I have now better ways to understand the data. It's a little bit smarter, but I want to know what will happen, right? So it's about predictive analytics, what's going to happen in the future. And that's when we layer in, our proprietary algorithms, AI, machine learning, and really take all of this information and say, this is what is most likely going to happen. And that's what we call our predictive analytics solutions. And then the last step, of course, is that, okay, now I know what has been happening, what is happening, what will happen, but what should I do? And this is then our full solutions where we help customers, based on all this information, fusing in often proprietary information from the customer. This is what is, a potentially the right way to react, to make a decision. That has been part of Spire's blueprint for, I want to say forever, for the life of our company, so to speak. So everything how the company is set up has this clean data, smart data, predictive analytics solutions chain where we walk ourselves and the customer from left to right over time.
Got it. And so as a new customer coming in, right, you could, for lack of a better analogy, get your feet wet with using the first third-party data and then go from there to where ultimately, right, there's a turnkey solution.
100% correct. You just nailed it.
And so as far as the growth drivers, right, of the business, right, it sounds like you've got a lot already on the first two legs, but with the solutions piece, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity there to build out the solution set as you add customers' capabilities moving forward.
Absolutely correct. So very often, and it's typical for data business in any financial services, and I have a big background. I used to work on Wall Street as an investor for almost 10 years. But any marketing, any kind of like big data businesses, whenever you go from what we would call here clean data to smart data, you increase the totally use case space and addressable market threefold to sometimes even fivefold. And if you go from smart data to predictions, this is what's going to happen. Again, you have the same 3 to almost fivefold increase. And the same thing when you go, okay, what should I do? Solution space increase from threefold to fivefold. So the expansion as we go from left to right is like how many problems we can solve for customers and for how many customers we can solve solutions. And then of course it is like identifying additional customers to bring into this funnel.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk about the numbers, profitability. We'll start with CapEx. And so can you tell us a little bit about, the CapEx needs for the business, both today and going forward?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that the constellation is fully deployed, and we have just about now the replenishment. Like we don't need to grow the constellation. On the margin, it might actually shrink because of that 10x every 5 years law that I mentioned earlier from my research. So we just do replenishment, just as anyone does, like with their technology. Maybe you do it with your iPhone or with your laptop. So every 3 years or so, we do replenishments of an individual asset, but we do it on an amalgamated basis, so not everything at once, so like piece by piece. And that's about $10, maybe $12 million a year. That captures all of our CapEx for those data businesses, satellites, ground stations, everything else that is involved. And so we have this massive operational leverage of a pretty small amount of CapEx that supports a quasi-unlimited amount of revenue from those data businesses. Collect once, sell many, many times.
So let's shift gears a little bit too and talk about profitability, if you want to put up the next slide, and really talk about that path to profitability and where you are today.
So we have, I always say you can take the European, and I'm originally from Austria, out of Europe, and put them in the US, but you can't really take Europe out of the European. And we Europeans, we are like these strange notions, companies are built to make money and not just grow. And so we came out talking about profitability very shortly after becoming public, and have been on that track ever since for now, like probably 6 quarters or so, bringing that timeline, how long to free cash flow profitability forward. And it's now, I think by today, it might be, I don't know, Ben can correct me, 9 to 15 or 10 to 16 months, depending on like where we are in the month, right? So it's a very, very clear line of sight. And what you see here on the bottom is kind of like how quickly and steeply our EBITDA and operating margins have been improving towards that zero line of profitability. So we feel very, very positive about that progress. We feel, maybe I allow myself to say we feel pretty proud of the operational leverage that we have in the business to be able to drive that profitability, even at that small a scale already. Even when some other SaaS companies have a hard time at, like $1 billion of revenue actually breaking even because their marketing expense is so high. What helps us a lot is that massive moat that we have of technology, analytics, and scale that allow us to bring solutions to market in a not hyper competitive way. And so we don't need to spend a massive amount of marketing to create like a share of voice. And that kind of like is just money that falls, right through the bottom line. And we have a fixed CapEx need for a quasi unlimited amount of revenue.
Yeah, it sounds like your customer acquisition cost is much lower than the traditional technology business for sure.
Yes,
so we've got a couple
that's right.
questions. Yeah, we got a couple questions from the audience. I'm going to jump into some of those, and I'll jump back. And this is a kind of a high level question, but it really goes to the environment itself when you think about satellites and you talk about the constellations. But the question is really, what is the limit, right? Is there a limit to how many satellites we can put up into orbit? And how do you get rid of old satellites? What is the life of a satellite? Some high level stats would be great.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say is that protecting our environment is incredibly important. It is important on Earth when we think of our, our forests, when we think of our waters, when we think of our biodiversity, when we think of our air, when we think of our oceans, when we think of our livestock in the ocean, the fish, as well as in space. All of those are common goods, and it's incredibly important to protect them. Now, talking about space, I wish there was a little bit more physics involved and less the movie Gravity. And when we talk about space debris, right? So I sometimes use like some form of analogy. It doesn't hold perfectly, but it helps as a visual a little bit. Spire tracks about 500,000 vessels on the world's oceans, right? Now the Earth's oceans only they capture like 3/4 of the planet of Earth, and so if we allowed them, the whole oceans, it might be something like 600,000 vessels. The nice thing about space is that it's not just a surface, but it's like a three-dimensional area, and so you could think of like shells of Earth every 10 or 20 kilometers, and then fill them with vessels, and they would not necessarily actually interact with each other. So one could see or like envision, hundreds and thousands of those ships, so to speak, 600,000 every, 10 kilometers, right? So for like, let's say 100 spheres. So we're talking millions and millions of ships that can walk around there. In low Earth orbit, we have a few thousand satellites right now. So the gap between how big space is and how much of it we use today is still very, very large. Now, there are some oversimplifications in this model. There's like certain areas where the density gets very, very tight, over the polar regions for the reason of orbital dynamics. And, if two ships crash into each other on the ocean, at some places it's a huge problem, like the Suez Canal. In other places, it wouldn't necessarily cause a whole lot of problem. But in space, if you have two satellites crash into each other, you create actually a problem for a whole bunch of other satellites as well. So I'm not saying that there is unlimited amount of space, but I can see a management of space as a resource that can accommodate a number of satellites that is not measured in thousands or tens of thousands, but measured in the hundreds and thousands and millions.
Perfect. So another question coming in, can you talk a little bit high level about capital structure? Have you guys done any refinancing of debt? As we're heading obviously into uncertain times, right? Are there other things that you guys kind of can look at to make sure that you stay healthy in case the environment does get worse where it is now?
Yeah. So Spire has cleaned up its cap table tremendously, right? We've gotten rid of all of our warrants. We have consolidated all of our debt into one, very high profile, very, very strong provider that we feel, very, very positive about. And we feel like we have a, quite strong balance sheet relative to the rapidly increasing margins and the timeline that we have for free cash flow profitability. We have put some, I would say like emergency things in place as well, like an ATM, which allows us to raise in a very simple and straightforward way some additional capital if it were so advantageous to the company. We have out the shareholder meeting in the beginning of June that will allow us to, if it is necessary, to do a specific type of stock split. It's called the reverse stock split, which simply means is like, you just reduce the number of shares, and so the price per share increases, so that you are, at a price per share that, fulfills all the requirements from the New York Stock Exchange. So I think we have literally all of the things in place that allows us to execute on the mission of the company, and reach, the free cash flow profitability and serve an ever larger number of customers on our pathway from over 100 million to, let's say, like the next big milestone is of course $1 million of recurring revenue.
Perfect. That's actually a great segue because we're running out of time here. We've got about 2 minutes left. But as we close, Peter, I actually wanted to thank you for participating in the time. It was great to learn more about Spire. But as we close, I want to turn it back to you for just any closing comments. What should investors be looking for, next from Spire over the next 3 to 6 months?
So I think, what investors should be looking for from Spire is continued execution alongside our timeline of profitability of quarterly goals. We have now delivered 7 quarterly results in a row of increasing revenue, meeting or exceeding our guidelines, our guideposts, meeting or exceeding consensus from the street, and just continue to execute on it. And I think the more and more people that look at the actual numbers and says like, well, this is a really attractive SaaS company that has a massive competitive moat and has all of the retention characteristics, the gross margin characteristics, the profitability metrics that I know from SaaS companies, it just doesn't have the massive sales and marketing spend, and really be part of what I consider just as transformative a time period as the 80s and 90s, where when it came from mainframe computers to personal computers, now it is about space being leveraged to create a more prosperous, safer, and sustainable future right here on planet Earth, literally for everyone.
Perfect. Peter, appreciate the time. Look forward to following the story and having you guys back on later this year to check your progress. Thanks for the audience for tuning in today. The replay will be available in about 30 minutes on the site. And up next is Alterity Therapeutics. Thank you.